Welcome, everybody. My name is Matt Chandler, and I'm really happy to be here. First of all, I'd like to thank the Berkeley Film Foundation and the Fleischhacker Foundation for inviting us here, and also a shout out to Caitlin Boyle for putting us back in touch with Berkeley Film Foundation, and especially to David Burgad, who's been great helping us to set up this workshop for you all today. And thank you all for taking the time to come, and especially to Michelle Fawcett, my partner in crime, who I'll introduce in just a moment, for flying down from Oregon to be here with us today. So a little bit about my background. And so I grew up in Berkeley, the son of two documentary filmmakers. Went to Berkeley High School and had my first taste of documentary film and an experience with docs at Berkeley High while they were shooting the film School Colors, and really got to see the impact that documentary film can have on a community, for better or worse. It was very impactful, and I went on to make my own film in school, and that was the first and last film that I ever made, because I realized how difficult filmmaking is. And I really appreciate all of you and the work that you do. So thank you all for carrying the torch and bringing these stories to life. It's very important work. And so both Michelle and I come from a background in nonprofit education and outreach. And when we learned about this opportunity to do outreach and partnership building and engagement with film, it seemed like something was off, and you know, what is this all about? So we had to dive in, and I worked on my first campaign with another Berkeley Film Foundation film, A Fragile Trust, and the illustrious Samantha Grant, who's not here today, but is an absolute superhero. And we ran a campaign in conjunction with consultation from Film Sprout for community screenings. And at that point, I really fell in love with the idea of a marriage between the nonprofit education world and organizations and artists, and the impact that film can have. And so that's the work that Michelle and I have been doing for a few years now. And we formed Indivisible recently. But before we get into more about our work, I'd like to introduce Michelle, who's going to come up here and talk to you guys.
All right, my name is Michelle Fawcett. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited that I don't live too far away. I used to live in New York for about a dozen years, so it's a lot easier to come down when you're just up the way in Portland, Oregon. So my background does have a bit of a Berkeley story too. I'm a graduate of Berkeley in film studies back in the 80s. I then went on to kind of traditional mainstream film distribution work with MGM in Los Angeles, where I was director of international distribution back in the early 90s. I then went to NYU, where I got my PhD, and I taught for a couple of years as an adjunct professor, really trying to bring together my love of film with my love of, making social change. So kind of connecting those two pieces. And over the last 5 years, I've been able to mobilize all of that experience and bring it together in this field that Matt is describing. We're called a lot of different things. We're called campaign strategists, impact producers, engagement specialists, a lot of different names for the work that we do. But I'm very happy to have been able to mobilize a lifetime of work in these issues and finding these intersections. You're going to hear that word a lot today, intersections between the world of film and the world of actually, sustainable filmmaking and impact. What kind of work does your film do in the world once it gets released? And this is the exciting part that we're going to be talking about today. So thank you for having us. We're going to go to the first slide and talk a little bit about just the workshop overview. I think it's really important to kind of have a big picture of what we're going to cover so you know where your questions might fit in and know where we're going with this. We're looking at this as very much as a process. You're going to hear that word a lot too. We want to start with a process to wrap your mind around what is actually a very complicated and quickly moving landscape, which I'm sure you're aware of. There is no stagnation in this field right now. There's a lot of transformations. On the production side, we have, new, forms of available equipment for people to democratize production. You have people able to make films. We have the whole digital turn, where there's a lot of different outlets and platforms where your film could be seen. We can't even keep track of how many different ways in which our films can get out there. But that poses a problem for people in this room in terms of how do we navigate this? There's so many ways we can go. We can barely keep up with what the options are. So what do we do? How do we start? How do we maximize those options, and where do we start in that process? And so sometimes filmmakers will come to us and want to, they have ideas. I want to do 100 screenings. I want to get my film into Capitol Hill. I want to recoup all of my big investment that I put into the film. There'll be a lot of things that you want to do, but what we want to emphasize today is that it's important to have a process in terms of how you do that. Because the worst thing is when we see people jump in and start to do a lot of different things that are exciting, but they don't lead to where you ultimately want to be. They don't lead you anywhere. So you could have a lot of, attempts that kind of don't add up to the big picture that you would like to see for your film. And we totally understand. I mean, we have this in our hearts. We understand what a process it is to make the film. So we want to make sure that the distribution piece of it is put together as carefully, and, probably making your film was not as, unmessy as you would have liked, but we're going to try to do everything we can to make the distribution process smooth. So filmmakers have to take a much more proactive role given the distribution landscape, and so we want to help you figure out what to do. So our workshop overview is we're going to first have an interactive process or exercise. You have worksheets in front of you. Hopefully you have a pen if people still carry those things. That might be helpful. We want to make it interactive because we want you to start thinking about your own film. We can stand up here and give you a lot of theory, we can give you a lot of case studies, but if it doesn't relate to you and your work as a filmmaker, it's just going to go in one ear and out the other. We want you to fully absorb this and apply it to your own work. So clarifying your intent for distribution, there's worksheets here. Hopefully you can have a pen there, or at least think about it as we go through the categories. We're then going to go over an overview of distribution types and pathways, which is a complicated universe, but we're going to do this in an organized fashion. You're going to have questions, but we'll try to do that as cleanly as we can. And then we're going to talk a little bit about under types of distribution, we're going to be looking really mostly at hybrid distribution today and what that means. Has anybody heard the term hybrid distribution or even uses it? A few people? Okay, great. And then we're going to talk about pathways, and that's basically just the very many different ways you can distribute your film. And in that section, we'll be talking about a focus on impact distribution, a little section on that. How many people have heard that term, impact distribution, use it, are familiar with it? Okay, great. And then we are going to focus on case studies. So we're going to be looking at a number of films that we have worked on together and separately with different budgets and goals. We recognize some people are making small films, some people are making big budget films, and we want to learn from their successes and missteps in order to illustrate a way forward. And so that's basically the workshop overview. And now I'm going to pass it over to Matt.
So before we jump into that, just a bit about what we're going to dive in here and what the worksheet is all about. Indivisible, we take on 2 to 3 films a year, which we distribute non-theatrically through community screenings campaigns or theatrical campaigns that are sort of a semi-theatrical component to it, conducting the outreach and building partners and walking the film through a strategy to design a thoughtful strategy around whatever their film has as its unique distribution goals. And so all of you came to this workshop for a reason, and we would like to have you think a little bit more in depth and critically about what those reasons might be and why distribution is important. So really what I'm going to dive into now and what the first part of this worksheet is the why. Because as Michelle pointed out, we tend to hear a lot of information. A lot of it might come to us from friends or colleagues about different success stories or failures with distribution. And a lot of films will jump right into trying to identify their goals without answering the larger questions about why did you make this film. So this next piece here, I'd like to have you all think about these questions and clarifying your intent for distribution. First of all, why did you make this film? Making a film is not easy. It takes years, it takes fundraising, it takes guts. Sometimes you're putting yourself in danger, shooting places that are unsafe. So if you're going to all of that work and trouble and putting out the resources and the time to do this, why was this an important decision and why was this film made? Now, why is this important that this film has distribution? Simple questions, but a lot of people kind of jump right past this. And then what will change with the successful distribution of your film? So thinking about that is the first piece of the worksheet there. And when you're ready or when it comes to you, you can start to jot down some thoughts about answering that why and having an intention for your distribution. And we'll be providing some examples to help you with that. And next, coming from the why, is what? Getting a clear picture in your mind of what successful distribution means for your film. So an image possibly, with a champagne toast with your cast and crew watching the broadcast, or looking at your budget in the black for the first time in years, or on stage with a robust panel for your festival release at a top industry festival, or at your theatrical release with a packed house. So trying to answer first the question about why you're doing this, and then to have an image, because when you're through the production stage and into distribution, often film teams are exhausted, resources are depleted, and it's a tough road, and you need something that gets you up in the morning and motivates you to do this, because it is an undertaking. And so, taking that time to think about this and to really be honest with yourself and your team, and then to have that vision to keep you moving forward. So you've got your intention, you've got the why and the vision, the image of what it looks like. Then it's time to think about your values, and we have a column there for that. So these are things that sometimes are explicit and sometimes are implicit. We'd like you to think about this. So they could be making sure that you are paid a salary for your work that you're doing while distributing, paying back recouping the production costs, not compromising the story of your film during distribution by retaining the ability to promote and market the film, keeping the voice and the story that's important to you. All sorts of things that are your values that when you get it out on paper and you're really honest about these, really help this process of clarifying what your intention is, what you want distribution to look like, and eventually some concrete goals to make that happen. Possible distribution goals. This is where you sit down and you think about all the different things that your film could accomplish. Some of them I just went over through those, images of a theatrical release or getting an all rights deal at a festival. What are the different goals that are appropriate to your film that might be possible? Don't limit yourself here. You can have a lot of these goals come out, a lot of them you've been thinking about, and then through this process of making sure that the goals that you've identified also are in sync and align with your intent, your vision, and your values, and then you can come up with the goals that really are going to move your film forward in a thoughtful way where you don't have to go down a path and then start reversing backward because you haven't answered these questions in the beginning of the process. So here are a couple examples of films that have come to us and we've done this process and they've found this very helpful. So we need to ensure our efforts in the making this film were worthwhile by using our film to generate revenue for our production company and help to inspire people to re-engage with our democracy. The film presents a valuable role model for democracy and public service, work ethic, and hence it is important that we make an impact beyond the festival circuit and cement the film as a resource. Then you get an image of what that would look like. You start to identify values. And it may be important for you to prioritize these or number them and really try to be honest. Because in terms of when you are going to be identifying goals and targets that you'll be putting your time and resources towards, it's really helpful to be as honest as possible about this. You know, does this campaign, does this distribution effort need to secure a certain amount of revenue? How much time and effort are you willing to put in as a producer director? All of these things are important to think about. So if things come to you now, feel free to start jotting them down. Possible goals come, and some of them you've been thinking about, you know, getting 1,000 people to re-engage in politics, selling the rights for broadcast, lifting voices of people on the margins, getting hired to produce a new political film, educate people about democracy, fill up the Democratic bench. All these things came out of this process that we did with this film. And then eventually, you'll go back to that Venn diagram, and don't worry, that will be the last Venn diagram of today, so if you're allergic, I'm sorry about that. But and then you'll have the clarified goals that will come out of this process. And you'll notice that a lot of these goals that you had thought about for years were something that this film needed to accomplish through distribution, when it has to be aligned with your honest intention about why you're doing this and what success will look like. A lot of those seem to be less important or not important at all into moving your intent forward. So again, that's this process of using your intention, vision, and values and the possible goals that you've outlined for distribution and clarifying them into goals that you can use. So any quick questions in regards to that? Great. So very quickly, maybe we can actually pause here for a moment before we go into distribution types. So how many people here have distribution experience with a film? Just start there with a general question. Okay. And how many people have experience with either self-distribution or hybrid distribution for a film? Great. So a lot of what we're covering here is going to be very basic, but we want to make sure before we dive into these case studies with the terminology and related to hybrid distribution that we're all on the same page with that. But before we move into that, are there any questions that anyone came here with that you're hoping are answered by the end of the workshop that we can jot down and hopefully get to integrating it into what we have to say or allowing some time for that? We will stop throughout the workshop today to allow some time for questions. But anything now, burning questions that are not specific to your project, but that can help to, you know, for everyone here in a more general sense, questions about distribution. Yeah, right here.
More curious about any strategies for entering film festivals.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yes.
It's been said in real estate there's only three things you need to know: location, location, location. And I have a theory that in filmmaking, the three things to know are distribution, distribution, distribution. I'd like to know if that's on target or if I'm off. I just made it up.
Yeah. Well, in a lot of ways, yes. And that again depends on what your goals are for your film. But a film without distribution, a lot of times, it can be sort of sad. That you've spent all this time making this beautiful piece of art, bringing this story to light, and the impact that it can have with thoughtful and proper distribution is sometimes beyond what you've imagined it can be, and without that you might just move on to your next project. So yeah.
Here, I'm going to pass over the microphone. Who's next?
I would love to hear not just the typical grants that are out there, but creative fundraising strategies for hiring folks like yourself, or running a campaign on your own, or whatever it might be. So alternative sources to the typical film impact grants that are out there that are so heavily hit by many other successful filmmakers. Thank you.
That's a good question about the grants. I think how's the best way to phrase this? For people who have organizations that have already expressed interest or are committed to helping you once your film is done, that have significant followings and email lists, the best way to navigate what to ask them to do and how to ask them to do it, and to coordinate if there are multiple organizations. Basically, I'm sure there are lots of people in this room who have some kind of issues-based film, and they might have an organization or two that said, yeah, we'd love to help. Let us know when your film is done how to, maximize that.
Okay, Michelle, can you highlight that one? Because we're going to touch on that, but we can drill down a little bit more on that. Yeah.
So I hear about the distribution landscape shifting. Will you be covering that as well? Would you tell us where it's going?
Yeah, so we could do a whole workshop on that, and what we decided to do was to actually demonstrate that through films that we are either currently distributing and running campaigns for. So that's going to become part of the case study, and I think that will be answer your question by actually showing you rather than telling you. We could do an entire workshop on nothing other than that, and then have 3 more hours to still continue that discussion. So we wanted to target it on our work, but we will be speaking about that through the case studies.
One of the things, I got
yeah.
now. Well, I just got back from Digital Hollywood. One of the things that people were talking about a lot was the younger audiences, like millennials and Gen Z and so on, and how the technologies like cell phones and so on are changing distribution. So I thought it might be really interesting to have your take on how to target those audiences using shorts and work that's geared towards what they will actually see and use, rather than necessarily how we traditionally think about distribution in terms of film festivals, feature-length films, and so on.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're probably
Nancy, you have
a couple
a question?
more, maybe.
Nancy had a question.
Up here, and
Hold
then,
on, we'll do Nancy, and then we'll get you, okay?
Yeah.
So I would like to hear any strategies that you might have for designing and distributing a film that doesn't have social issues, a documentary without social issues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, all right. Workout today.
Given that the acquisition medium for the public to have copies of your film is changing so rapidly all the time, and I've had a lot of success in the past with selling DVDs, I'm wondering if it's not too much of a technical digression from what you're presenting here today, if you could address ideal streaming platforms and what the public generally today is preferring between download or streaming, and where's the best way to present that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll be discussing that a little bit, and yeah.
Do we have time for one more, or do you want to get going?
We'll do one more and then let's roll. But
okay, Abel, you want to go quickly?
If you could discuss what the team you would need once say you're at Fine Cut, and now what team you would need professionals to help you navigate that?
Yep, that's already in there, so we'll cover that for
You
sure.
did have your hand up, so we'll just do one more.
Have I told you lately that I love you? Thank you. I have so many questions. I'll do my best to keep it brief. I'm always interested in the nuts and bolts, i.e., how much. Producers rep, I hear 5%. Just sales rep, I hear 10%. Netflix, I hear they take 30%. There's a distributor in Sausalito called Rocco. They take 30. I like to know, how much am I going to get for my film once it's distributed? I've heard nightmare stories of these medium level distributors buying your film, and then they go ahead and sell it to Netflix and they make money, but the filmmaker never sees anything. So I'm interested in that. And I was just actually up in Portland at Cinema 21, where I'm four-walling my film right now, and Alex Honnold, the Free Solo movie, was up there, and every show was sold out, 500 seats. Wow. And the theater owner, who's really cool, you probably know Tom Ranieri, he told me that the theater's getting 50% of those tickets. The distributor gets the other 50%. How much is the filmmaker getting of that distributor 50%? That's what I want to know. So if I'll wrap it up right now. So I want to know those things in order. Maybe I should just put up my own platform. Why do I need to pay iTunes 30% of something just so because they have a platform? So that's my comment and question. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you. We'll have time for some more questions in a bit, but I think we have lots to go on now.
Yes. All right, so let's get to some basic distribution types. Obviously, all rights deals, premiering at one of the top festivals, and bringing a traditional distributor on to distribute your film is still an option for some films and might be of interest to you. But again, it goes back to your clarified distribution goals through thinking about why you're doing this and what the pros and cons might be to signing with a distributor. Self-distribution, DIY all the way, and then hybrid distribution really being carving up your rights. And honestly, that's what we're going to focus on today, because it seems like most filmmakers are in this space of hybrid distribution. And this does not mean that you're doing it yourself. So I wanted to make sure that that is clear, that self-distribution is DIY, whereas hybrid distribution, there's an element of that, but you are retaining certain rights and then letting go of others. So basic overview of distribution pathways. We've got cinema, theatrical, where you could sell your rights to a distributor, or you could hire a distributor. There are fee-for-service distributors as well. You can do cinema on demand, which is an outfit like Tug, or I guess it is Tug at this point. I gather is no longer doing that. And then DIY theatrical. So doing it all yourself, and we're going to get into these more in the case studies, and we'll talk about retaining of rights and the splits and all of that, but just wanted to make sure that was clear. Semi-theatrical, sometimes referred to as non-theatrical, community screenings, reaching your film's audience, creating an impact, word-of-the-mouth buzz, and also these type of screenings can be valuable. What's happening here? Yeah, thank you, Google. So they can help to really support the other distribution windows. So a lot of films have a community screenings campaign element, whether that's a few screenings or a larger sustained campaign in the hundreds. Home use DVD and broadcast we all know about. For educational distribution, you've got the educational DVD, which you could sell yourself or sell the rights to a distributor that will sell the DVDs for you and give you a cut of a certain percentage. I'm not going to get into those numbers quite yet. And then you've got EVOD, the educational video on demand platforms that most educational distributors actually have, and they sell digital site licenses through their platforms. Canopy being the largest example of that. Tug EDU also has some nifty tools for educators to add their notes and do presentations. So this is on-demand streaming platforms for libraries and educational institutions. So some of these are a digital site license that the school or library would purchase for 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years. And some of them are these patron-driven acquisition PDA models. How many people know about the PDA and how that works? So basically, librarians, have been hit pretty hard by filmmakers that want them to purchase their film for their institution, and they're kind of overwhelmed being the curator for documentary films along with the rest of their responsibilities. So instead of being that curator in the PDA model, it takes a certain number of views for the film to trigger a license. So it's either 3, 4, or 5 unique views of at least 30 seconds of your film would then trigger a license for 1 year or 3 years. Each institution negotiates its own license agreement with the platform, and then the platform then in turn would negotiate with you as the content owner. Some of these platforms take independent filmmakers' films. They used to do it a lot more. More and more they're working with distributors, or if you have a group of films that you would like to sell the rights for EVOD. And then along with educational distribution comes the ancillary materials with viewer guides and educational curriculum guides. And for video on demand, transactional with the options to download and rent. We all know about iTunes and Amazon. Vimeo and VHX offer some extra options. A lot of filmmakers will use that to provide exclusive content, to sell that at a higher price, and depending on your film, that can be a nice extra revenue stream, and sometimes can even be greater than the actual TVOD sales. SVOD is subscription video on demand. We all know about Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and the like. And then there's AVOD, the lesser known VOD, with advertising supporting the platform for content owners to get paid through ads and viewers to be able to watch the film for free, although you're giving your data, obviously, and you have to suffer through car commercials. So there are ways to do this yourself, and I don't want to get into this too much, but you should all Google Content ID. So this helps in a couple of different ways with pirating of your film. If you Content ID this on YouTube, it basically is a cyber watermark that makes sure that your film, if it is pirated and it is used in a way that monetizes the film, they actually will take that revenue and put it into escrow, and then you can actually benefit from whatever pirate came along and stole your film and monetized it. So that's something everybody should look into, Content ID. But there are channels on YouTube and other platforms like Real Stories who take a cut but also will help to promote your film through their channel so that you can cut through the noise and actually monetize AVOD. I won't go too much into that, but this is something I will just say, we're not going to give much direct advice during this workshop, but AVOD usually comes much later than in the release sequence than the other distribution and VOD platforms. Great. So Michelle's going to talk about. Do we have a hand fly up? Yes.
Oh, just a quick question on the Google Content ID. Does that also work for other platforms or just YouTube?
Just YouTube. Yeah. And there's a whole video. You have to get trained on how to Content ID. It used to be something that wasn't available to everyone, and just in the last year or so, they have release that and come out with a video to help train you how to do that, and then you can get in touch with YouTube and they'll help you with that. Another question? Yeah?
On the subject of pirating your film, is there anything you can do when you see your film's been somehow on BitTorrent?
Yeah, that's a tough one. For YouTube, absolutely. There's a form you fill out, and they're usually within, I'd say, 5 to 7 days. Usually the response time on that, they'll take it down. But BitTorrent, really, you have to protect your intellectual property, and so when you're, using the film for screenings and even festivals, just really keeping track of what you're putting out there in the world is really the best way to prevent against that, because once it's out there, it's out there. A lot of times people worry about that a little bit more than they need to in terms of how that might end up cannibalizing and whether it will at all, or actually whether it might help to promote your film, and especially if you can now monetize it in these ways with Content ID, but not through BitTorrent. There's no good way to fix that. So Michelle's going to come up and talk a little bit about impact distribution.
All right. So we saw that probably roughly maybe more than half of you had heard about impact distribution and maybe even had been involved in trying to achieve impact with your previous films. So I just want to give a little bit of a contextualization of what it is and what it means and how it could help your film based on a couple of studies that have been done recently by the American University Center for Media and Social Impact and IDA, which is the International Documentary Association. They got together in 2016 and did an inaugural report where they interviewed 600 documentary filmmakers to find out about all aspects of their lives, from how do they support themselves while they make these films, which, as you probably know from personal experience, is a tough story to hear, but they went and they got that information. And then also to find out, just how they work, where their films go, how they get distributed, how much revenue do they make, that type of thing. So I would recommend taking a look. There's a 2016 report. There's also a 2018 report that's been updated. There's also been a couple of convenings since that time where people are getting together and talking about the results and talking about, how do we address these challenges? I mean, everybody is going about recreating the wheel with their films, struggling individually. So if we can gather information and get more information and share more information in settings like this, so that the information becomes public, and then we can act upon it. When we see what the similar challenges are, we can start to take some kind of organized method where there's organized funding and there's organized courses of action. There's never going to be I shouldn't say never, but probably won't be just a one-size-fits-all template ever. But we can create some sort of pathways that help you. So what they found out, some of the things that they found out in this report, a couple of things. So even though the field is so challenging, most filmmakers said that they do feel like it's the golden age of documentary film. And they felt that way for two reasons. One is the availability of digital platforms. And instead of seeing that as something that is daunting, they're seeing that as an opportunity, as long as we can understand what those platforms are. Like you're saying, what are they? How do we maximize the revenue for us, the content creators? How do we know if there's an aggregator out there that is inserting themselves into the process and taking a certain amount of money, but at the same time respecting that this is all work, this is all labor. If you don't personally do it, somebody else needs to do it. And it is labor. And so it has to be compensated. But how do we track that and make sure that it's equitable so that you can make the best decision? Do you want to put your labor time into it, or do you want to hire somebody to do it? And is that the best way to get your film out there? Again, it starts with that vision that we talked about in the beginning. So digital platforms offering more opportunities. But the other interesting piece of it is that there's more opportunities to create social impact, and there's more interest in social impact in some ways. So most of the filmmakers, as you can see in this chart here, 38% said they want to make a positive impact on social issues. And, you know, that's not surprising. I mean, obviously most filmmakers who make documentaries are interested in a subject and they want to see something happen with the subject. That's not with all documentaries, though. They don't necessarily have that social impact piece. You know, the impact could be any number of things. It could be having policy change around the subject of your film. It could be building movements. It could be used as an organizing tool to, you know, help organizations and groups of people who come together to try to make change in the world. It could just be education and consciousness raising. It could be, you know, educating the general public about your issues. So there's a lot of different ways that impact could actually take place. So don't get caught up in thinking that it's a narrow definition. I mean, even for those of you who are making non-social issue films per se, everything ultimately is social. And even the art film, you may want to have some sort of result or goal from that that's useful. And so that brings me to a couple other points about the importance of social impact. It's not just that the filmmakers want to have an impact. There's a whole ecosystem that's interested in impact. I mean, part of that is the kind of society that we live in, right? Things need to be measurable. We live in a system where we need to be able to measure results. So funders, for example, are interested in results because they want to know what happened to their investment. So when you have a social impact campaign, you have a very interesting, vital, attractive reason for funders to follow this work or to see the point in investing in it more. So that's one aspect of it. Organizations, whether they're little nonprofits, big corporations, clubs, church groups, you name it, any kind of group could be interested in using your film. And part of what we're going to talk about when we go into the case studies is rather than, upfront thinking who are your partners and being so convinced that you know who you're, I mean, if they're contacting you, yeah, they're probably a partner. But sometimes we come to these projects thinking, well, my film is definitely about A, B, and C, and I'm definitely going to have the Sierra Club and the so-and-so and the so-and-so are going to be my partners. Rather than spending all your time convincing someone to be your partner, what we want to try to encourage you to do is find your partners because they're out there. There's all sorts of niche audiences, and often what happens is you find out that the audience is not what you expected. You think your film is about one thing, somebody else sees something else in your film, you've opened up a whole other conversation, you've developed a whole other audience for your film and a whole mechanism for it to be distributed and for it to be used. So organizations are interested now because they're seeing the ways in which film can attract new audiences or members for their own work, and the ways in which film is a new method of public engagement, right? It's a new way to share your initiatives, to share your work, to have conversations. It's all of that. And that's the kind of exciting piece that's really wasn't so much the case before when you just sell your rights and maybe your film shows in a theater and people see it and they go home. This is very much an interactive piece, which is exciting. And part of the reason for this is there's a growing recognition of the power of storytelling. And the fact that documentary films are not just boring, dry nonfiction. We all hear this now. Nonfiction is actually weirder than fiction, right? It's much more interesting. And people, the general public, and there's studies that show this, general public is really interested in watching real stories. Because you can't make this shit up, right? I'm sorry, but you really can't. I mean, the stuff that you find out there, and that's something that's very interesting. So we're seeing storytelling workshops across different fields, right? You'll have corporate groups that, talk about storytelling, right? Because they're doing what you're doing. They're trying to craft a narrative. They're trying to craft a story with an arc that has a beginning and an end and takes you somewhere, that transports you somewhere. So everybody's interested in this kind of way of thinking, and that's where you start to see this intersection between what you guys are doing and between what people and other entities or other, spheres of social life are doing. They're starting to see ways in which we can work together to reach a common goal. So let me see what I have here on my next slide. Yeah, so, even though we have these individualized digital platforms where, you were talking about younger people with their phones, individually watching their own pieces of content, and how do we know what all of these individuals are watching and when? That's one piece of it, but at the same time, we have community screenings, which are social settings. And those social settings are the place where people have conversations, where they learn something together, where they take action, and where things start to happen with your film. Your film starts to take on a life of its own. So this particular slide, they asked the filmmakers then this isn't necessarily revenue, this is asking filmmakers where they distributed their films, is the basic question behind this slide. And so film festivals still come out to be the top for documentary film. But as you can see here, and you might not be able to see that very well, but it does say grassroots and community screenings. And so that's the social screening impact world, which is obviously a very popular mechanism to get your film out there. And I should also say that community screenings, when you work in a social setting, you have an impact that carries forward. So rather than seeing each sort of area of distribution as taking something away from your film, like, oh, used up that audience, I've used up this audience, we're looking at community screenings as a way of creating momentum. So what we see in the work that we do with community screenings is people go to a screening and people want to host their own screening. They're like, this is a cool thing. I can invite some people. I can do this at my church, I can get this conversation going. And so what you're actually doing is you're creating more of an audience with your community screening. So that's something that's exciting that you wouldn't necessarily see. When people go to a theater and they talk to their friends about it, but it's much more so in community screening settings where you see this sort of momentum. And then you get other people asking for the film. And we know because we do these campaigns and we say, oh, so-and-so hosted and their friend wants to host and their friend and their business partner and whatever. So there's a way in which this takes on a life of its own. And it's definitely interesting and exciting. And, we can see a sort of win-win situation between impact and between the mechanism of distribution, right? So when you see this kind of win-win, this is the sort of pathway for sustainability. When you see that you can create an impact and you see that you have a setting to be able to keep generating this, that's the kind of intersection that we're looking for. And that's what makes it an exciting time for documentary film. All right, so I just have another slide here, which is very pretty to look at. We have impact and distribution. And on the left side, basically, it's giving us a visual for this intersection that I was just talking about. On the left side, we see traditional forms of distribution. I know it's tiny. This is also going to be filmed, and people are going to be able to refer to it later with the exact links for where you can find the information. Traditional distribution versus impact, as though those were separate categories of things. And sometimes in the past, you can even see competition between, over here we have theatrical cinema distribution, and over here we have a community screening that's an influencer screening. So an influencer screening is, basically you host a screening because you want to create word of mouth. You want to have a bunch of people come who are very important people in that field, and they start talking about it and they generate that interest. So you could see the ways in which that might be seen as competition. But when we start to put these together, as we do over here, you can see where these things intersect, where community screenings could actually help another aspect of your distribution or vice versa. And that's only, again, bringing us back to this worksheet, is if you have this vision and if you have this plan, you can start to see these areas come together. And it makes a lot more sense when you see that start to happen with your work. All right. I think that is it. Are there any, we're going to basically after this go into the case studies, because I think it's going to help to see how this happens with real films that we've worked on. But if there's any questions for now, yeah.
On the last screen, previous slide, you had the public television the lowest. Does that mean that's the lowest percentage there. So it's not as high as film festival as far as going on.
Not as many filmmakers that they interviewed out of the 600 or so people that they interviewed. Not as many of them used public television or had the opportunity to use public television as a mechanism for the distribution of their film. So it's just when they interviewed filmmakers, how many different kinds of platforms did you use? And so most of them, 57% said film festivals, right? Not so many said they were able to get onto public television. So this is not an indication of revenue or of anything else. It's just an indication of how popular the mechanism is, the format of distribution is.
What's your experience, or what do you feel as far as if you had a PBS for public television opportunity?
If you had that opportunity, well, I think it'd be a great opportunity to have. It's not one that everybody has, and that's its own discussion, what's happening with public television. I mean, I've worked with a filmmaker who basically got everything on public television and is finding it very difficult now, even though he's got many, many years of getting his film on public TV. So there's different, constraints. Basically, we're showing this chart to show you how much opportunity there is in this ground up here, which is community screenings, which is something you can have control over, something that you have that's yours, and maybe you work with people like us to help you do it, but you don't have the same gatekeepers or funding issues that public television has to deal with, or economic pressures that they have to deal with. So. Mm-hmm.
How many questions do you want to take?
Oh, just another one or two, and we should probably. How are we doing on time? We're at 2. We're doing good. Yeah, time to get into case studies. Yeah, I can hear you.
How are you defining distribution in terms of film festivals? Does it just mean in terms of viewership, or that these are filmmakers who actually manage to manifest deals?
Yeah, don't take too much about this one screen. This is just one of the survey questions that kind of shows us the popularity of each area of distribution. So yeah.
So are 57% of filmmakers saying that film festivals were a context for distribution, making deals?
Yep. That they got into a film festival. Yep.
No, yeah. Yeah, it means as a mechanism to get your film out there in the world. It had that percentage has nothing to do with how many of those filmmakers at those festivals actually made distribution deals.
Right.
Film festivals as themselves a mechanism for distribution.
Right. Yeah. No, this is very limited, the question that was asked for this, which is, what channels have you used as a filmmaker? So, but definitely go take a look at the reports. Again, we'll have resources on our website, and you can just quickly take a look and see, more information about what other filmmakers are doing. And with that, we're going to move into case studies.
Okay, hold on. That's great.
Yep. Somebody's got their hand up over there.
Do you want to answer a question?
Just
you want to go
one
into
more,
the?
yeah. Maybe just one more,
you-
because we're getting into case studies now. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm super interested in the 44% you had on the last slide, the grassroots and community organizing. And I guess specifically, so I'm interested in social impact, but I'm wondering if you could talk more just about strategies around doing
we
that.
will. Yep, that's the next hour. Yeah. Yep. Thank you for doing a really nice segue for me. Perfect. I wish we had somebody planned in the audience for each of these sections. All right, so we are now on to case studies. And again, these are films that Matt and I worked on together or individually. And the first one I worked on was called Inequality for All, which is a 2013 film by Jacob Kornbluth. It was also a Berkeley Film Foundation 2012 grant winner. The film was based on classes taught here at UC Berkeley by Professor Robert Reich, who was former Secretary of Labor. The film concerns the widening economic gap in the U.S. In the wake of the Great Recession in particular, and more broadly since the 1970s. So, not the sexiest sounding subject matter, and probably people at the time thought, like, who in the world is going to watch a film about economics? But as we know, this film had a real impact, and it also did really well. So if we can play a quick trailer, and you can...
the thing you ought to know about this Mini Cooper is it is small. We are in proportion, me and my car. My name is Robert Reich. I was Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton. Before that, the Carter administration. Before that, I was a special aide to Abraham Lincoln. Of all developed nations, the United States has the most unequal distribution of income, and we're surging toward even greater inequality. 1928 and 2007 become the peak years for income concentration. It looks like a suspension bridge.
Last year, we made $36,000.
I probably make $50,000 a year, working 70 hours a week.
The middle class is struggling. Now, people occasionally say to me, what nation does it better? The answer is the United States. In the decades after World War II, the economy boomed, but you had very low inequality.
Do you know Robert Reich? I do indeed. He's a communist.
When I was a kid, bigger boys would pick on me. I think it changed my life. I had to protect people from the people who would beat them up economically. Who is actually looking out for the American worker? The answer is nobody. If workers don't have power, if they don't have a voice, their wages and benefits start eroding. We are losing equal opportunity in America. Any one of you who feels cynical, just consider where we have been.
How many people have seen that film? Yeah, I would imagine. All right. So, Inequality for All was one of the top impact docs of 2012-2013. It screened in over 100 theaters, did a box office of over $1 million. Now, it did have, obviously, major distribution partners on board. It had the celebrity cachet of Robert Reich, of course. He's just got so many fans, and we found that in doing the community screenings campaign, is just how many people knew about him and loved him and wanted to use his film in their work. So that was exciting. The Impact campaign was also funded. It was funded by the Ford Foundation and some other major partners. But really what it had, I think, and those are not small things, of course. I mean, you have somebody like this caliber in your film, that's important. But the film also just had a lot of creativity, the campaign around just doing different campaigns around the film, which were very creative. So one of the first things that, and this will speak a little bit more to your question about partners, is you have some people coming to you from organizations, possibly, who are interested in working with the film, and you're going to do some outreach to others. And so the way that we generally do partnerships is that we try to look for the most likely. We do basically, an overview or an ecosystem, a movement ecosystem, I guess we can call it. And that is looking at all of the players in your field and sort of mapping out who they are and deciding who we should talk to about your film. So there's a whole process behind that, and we can't really get into all the details. But that's essentially what this process is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it right here. So two of the partnerships that Inequality for All explored and were very, very productive is, working with two of the biggest organizing platforms, and that's Move On, which everybody's probably familiar with, and Democracy for America. So what we did with this Move On was just to basically have a Google Hangout with Robert Reich. And you can see here, I mean, this looks great. It's got Move On's name on it. You've got the Hangout here embedded on the website. You're reaching really millions of people with the film. And so that was one of the partnerships, one of the results of the partnerships for Inequality for All. Another one was with, again, DFA, who also has many millions of members. And what they did was to encourage folks to host an Inequality for All house party. And they provided this on their website, encouraging people to do this. And what they did was to collect information. So you basically signed up to do this, right, with Democracy for America. And you gave contact information. You said where you're going to do it, when you're going to do it. And what happens is Democracy for America brings in people. So they were able to look at their own, lists and see all over the country where they can connect people. And they're like, oh, you're interested in doing a screening here? We've got a bunch of people here in Sacramento who want to do this with you. And so the film in this way becomes an organizing tool. It becomes a way to bring people together to start doing the work. That's why it's attractive to the organization like DFA, and that's why it's attractive to a filmmaker, because you're getting more people together to see the film and have more conversations. So that's where you have the same goal, essentially, and how that plays out is through something like this, doing house parties. And so what happened was, in no time, there were 700 watch parties in almost every state in the country, reaching well over, I think at one point, it was like 7,000 people were involved in seeing this film. And Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, got interested in and participated in the conversation too. So they held you were to hold your screening on a certain day. And the way that encourages you to do it is because you're going to have Robert Reich and Senator Warren talking to you about the film, at 9 o'clock after you finish watching the film. And so, that was a really great opportunity to get a lot of people to do something. And that's another little trick in organizing is to pick a date or a time sensitive event and say, look, this is when we're all going to do this. And you get more people on that way. It eventizes your work, so it's not random. Yeah.
Forgive the naive question. These screenings are free?
These were. Mm-hmm.
For instance, does Move On and the other was a DFA, to partner with them, are they asking for a fee or are they doing it because it's supporting their...
It's supporting each other.
So
Yeah. So the film itself had funding to do its outreach campaign. Yeah, so, the film has some of its needs in terms of staff time and others who are involved in setting this up. Is covered through a grant in that case. Yeah, but of course, there's always somebody has to do the work and needs to get paid. And everybody here knows what it's like not to get paid to do really good work, really hard work. But what we're trying to point out is that there is some of that synergy. DFA is willing to publicize this to millions of people because there is an outcome for them. They're fully invested in the meaning of this film and in the outcome that it could have in terms of organizing. All right, so one other quick thing here, and sometimes, it doesn't always have to be a long, big, well-developed campaign. And I'll talk a minute about what a campaign really is. Sometimes it can be something fun that's grabbing of media attention. And so what they did was during this budget government shutdown was to offer all of these workers who were put out of work free tickets to see the film. And they got coverage in the Hollywood Reporter. So sometimes it's coming up with these creative ideas. And again, come up with them in the context of doing that vision exercise because it will have a lot more impact if you can do that. But by all means, come up with ideas like this because you never know what it can get you. And obviously being in the Hollywood Reporter is an awesome thing. Okay, and then the last thing I'm just going to talk about just real quickly is the campaign that I was involved in, and it was called the 50 State Capital Tour. Now, we can go into a lot more detail about what a campaign is, but it's essentially like anything, a military campaign, a political campaign, a publicity campaign. It's something that you sit down, you think through, you organize it. It has a beginning and it has an end. You have a goal and you know if you're meeting that goal, right? So it's orchestrated. And this was one of these orchestrated campaigns. And the 50 State Capital Tour, the intention was to get the film in front of legislators in every state capital in the country. And we did that. We basically got this film scheduled everywhere. And the way that we did that is we engaged big national partners like AFL-CIO, who can then say to their chapters, look, we got this thing going on. You guys might want to get involved. And then on the local level, we started with AFL-CIO in North Carolina, and we brought together other organizations who had similar interests. And sometimes what's interesting is these organizations didn't even know each other. It was the result of our research and organizing work, and we brought them together. So we were sort of doing some of the organizing work for people. And again, that idea of intersection is that we're bringing people together and we're achieving something together. And so these teams of organizations basically hosted community screening events in every capital. And one of the things that we do is we offer, cohesive aesthetically pleasing marketing materials like this customizable flyer. It's something you can just plug in your own information. And as you can see here, it makes you, as an organization, feel like you're really part of the film campaign. You know, you're up there with your organization, the date and time of your screening, your local university. You've got Robert Reich over here. And, you know, the film is basically being publicized on this website that's going to reach a lot of people, and people are going to sign up to see the film. So that was a thing that happened over a period of months, and it had its own sort of momentum and its own sort of way of happening. But it was very successful, and you know, since then we've gotten a lot of requests to replicate this type of campaign.
Can you talk about the impact? Like, was the legislation changed? Did they write new legislation? Did policy come? Like,
yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So if you go to the website for Inequality for All, they basically had 6 points that they were looking to try to change, and when I tell you what the 6 points are, when you go and look at it, you're going to know that we haven't gotten there yet. So raising the minimum wage, which we've gotten there a little bit because of grassroots organizing. We've got 15 now in play, but that was really, you know, is it the result of the film? It's hard to say. They didn't do too much measurement for this one to see. And they also had 6 different campaigns that were really big lifts. So that would be one of them. Strengthening labor unions. Obviously, we've taken the opposite course, unfortunately. We are weakening labor unions massively right now after Janus. But again, so there were 6 different points. If you look at the website, you can see what they are. And so it was left a little bit open. And I think the intention behind that was that anybody can get on board with a piece of this. One of them was getting money out of politics. So that way we got all the money out of politics groups to be like, yeah, that's one of the things that Robert Reich says we should do. So let's go and talk about getting money out of politics. And it became sort of a rallying point for the people working in that area. So they didn't do as much measurement as far as I know in terms of direct, like let's do one specific thing and see what happens. But again, going back to the beginning, I mean, it depends on what you define as impact, right? So there were many petitions that were, you know, there was a college screening day. There was a day when all the colleges got to screen the film and talk to Robert Reich, and he had them sign a petition. I think it was like 25,000 students signed to get a raise in the minimum wage. And so that type of thing. I mean, it does lead to something, but again, if you don't know what your goals are, it's hard to say. So that's why we encourage you to make a determination at the outset of the type of things that you want to see happen. Yeah.
I wonder if you were involved with the sequel of this?
No, I wasn't. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that.
I was going to ask you know, they went a different way, it seems. Like it was only distributed through Netflix, and I didn't see any of these kinds of activities happening for the second movie at all.
Yeah.
I wondered if you knew anything about that.
Yeah, I don't know the backstory to that, but it would definitely be interesting, yeah, to see why there was a shift there. Yeah.
Is this done before was this done before the theatrical release where you showed the box office numbers, or at the same time? Can you talk about the timing of this type of campaign
Yeah.
with regard to the rollout of the film?
Yeah, so I think it was still screening theatrically in some places while this was, so that seems to be a thing. You know, you start planning this and you start taking advantage of some of the momentum that's building. And then this, you know, so there's timing issues. You know, you have to ask yourself, you know, what your ultimate goal is. If you feel like this is going to add to the theatrical, I mean, you're not going to probably do it simultaneously, you know, obviously with your theatrical release, but there could be parts of these wheels that are in motion, I guess is what I should say, while, you know, so, you know, maybe this had already screened or hadn't screened in one state, but already screened in another state. And that's when this started. So we had a worksheet of windows, basically, to have an understanding. And we knew that it wasn't going to show in some capitals. It wasn't going to show in, you know, Frankfort, Kentucky. So we were able to, you know, advance that screening. So there was like a way in which we were able to work out. But that only happens when you have a team and when you're talking to each other and you can actually plan that out in a way that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was asked, for example, this movie probably had a traditional distribution. And then you were the impact campaign. So who fundraised for you fundraised for yourself, or the producer fundraised?
Producers fundraise for the impact campaign.
And then they pay to you and they do the job.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, there's all sorts of different models.
And then there should be a lot of difficult, like a lot of work to not to make the traditional distributor angry with your job, yeah? That's a lot of...
There's some points that need to be softened. Yeah. There's points. Yeah, and I personally may not have been in all of those conversations. Sometimes that's just the producer, and but sometimes there's a lot more synergy, and that's what we're trying to get at today: is that there can be more synergy. There definitely can be, and especially if you have these conversations early, you build that team early. You just develop your lanes, who's doing what, how it's going to all help the film, make sure we're all on the same path, and yeah. So I should probably turn it over to the next case study, which will be Matt.
All right. So I think we're going to get to see another video. So this is going to be Love Thy Nature, which is a film released a few years ago, which is a documentary narrated by Liam Neeson. And this film was about humans' connection with the natural world. And we're going to get into the whole release strategy for the film and the windows and the community screenings campaign. But first, I think we're going to see a short trailer.
Take a journey through the new era of human evolution, where our hearts and minds are inspired by the wonders of nature.
Great. So Love Thy Nature is definitely a great case study for hybrid distribution. So Sylvie Rocab is the director and was acting as the producer for some time, and then brought on a small team that included some consultants to figure out what strategy would be best for her. And so the film had its festival release, and shortly after that, I don't think we have a slide for this, but this film, unlike some others like Inequality for All, actually started the community screenings alongside the festival screenings, and then moved in to a full DIY theatrical release, and then continued the screenings campaign and folded that into an educational release with a traditional educational distributor. And at that point, that was, other than the direct relationships with exhibitors, the only rights that the film actually sold were the educational rights, and even those were very carved out and made it clear where the film could still monetize and book screenings in educational settings. So we're going to take a look more fully at that, and then how you do a DIY campaign when you're deciding to roll out a film yourself with a few partners. So this film, for the community screenings and for the theatrical campaign, we had a small team, which included myself and Michelle. We were booking community screenings and working with community partners. So to bring on board partners to help the community screenings campaign along with the theatrical release. So the picture you see there on the right is a screening in New York, one of the theatrical screenings when the film released in theaters around Earth Day. And there is a mom from Mom's Clean Air Force who was one of the partners that helped to bring out people to the theatrical release. And the film opened in New York and LA. And this was not through a distributor. This was an effort that we made as a team because this, this was Sylvie's vision. This was a film that was beautiful. It had Liam Neeson as the narrator and really deserves to be enjoyed by theatrical audiences. So that was embedded in her intention and her vision for the film. And when traditional distribution opportunities didn't present themselves, we didn't let that stop us. And in fact, we did something that only a few other films I've heard about doing, which was a strategy to connect directly with the exhibitors in the art houses who might be interested in showing this film. So we traveled before Sundance to the Art House Convergence. Anybody heard of this? AHC? Anybody been? Really fun. I think it's probably what Sundance used to be back in the day. So it's a good number of the art house exhibitors, which also a lot of them are the film festival staff and programming team of the festivals, come, and it's like summer camp. And there's not a whole lot of film teams actually there, but it was a great opportunity to hear from the side of the exhibitors themselves what they're looking for, what their challenges are. I learned that 70% of these art houses are community supported and foundation supported, and it was really from the perspective of learning about from the exhibitor's perspective when booking a film, what they look for was very valuable. And on top of that, we got to also meet with the exhibitors, and were able through that 3-day conference to book the film at a number of individual art houses for a one-night engagement, and also were able to book a week run at the Monica Theater, which is one of the Laemmle theaters in LA, in Santa Monica, which was a great way to be able to sandwich that with then a 4-wall in New York City for its theatrical release on the East Coast. So then began the project of bringing partners on board and doing a lot of grassroots outreach, and also following up with all of those exhibitors and really persuading them that, look, we are ready to do this, are you? And so what were the exhibitors looking for from our team? So Liam Neeson, the name obviously is a household name, but he was a narrator and not a star in the film. Therefore, that did not really turn out to be one of the deciding factors as far as a film being able to sell tickets or not. So what exhibitors were looking for is, what partner organizations do you have in our town that you are partnering with that are going to buy group tickets, that are going to do the outreach with your team, that are going to utilize their large networks on social media and email listservs to get people out to these screenings. And so we had to do that work, and we reached out and did an exhaustive effort of research of all of the different types of organizations, and used sort of the scientific method of figuring out who the core audience for the film was, and being able to be very nimble in our hypotheses and quickly change those as we learned that the viewers that we thought might be interested in the film were not as interested as others, and there were some other affinity groups and other niche audiences that were absolutely passionate. And so we were able to identify some passionate fans that helped to support the theatrical release. Now, in terms of going back to the discussion about your intention and vision, for a lot of films, for documentaries in particular, the theatrical campaign and release is looked at as a loss leader. So something that can be a financial hit, but you know that through that campaign you are establishing relationships, you're getting reviews in major publications, and you can utilize that momentum, that press, those individuals who come to see the film, those organizations that you bring on board as partners, the exhibitors, to help other windows for distribution, and that was the case with Love Thy Nature. So it did, a box office, I think, around only 15K. It was, in the red as far as, the revenue did not pay for the staff time and what it took to book. But then again, because this was going not through a distributor, not having to share those profits with anyone else other than the exhibitor, most of the time it was usually in the 60-40 exhibitor content owner split, and so we were able to keep that revenue and use that for other aspects of distribution. And through that, and also through the simultaneous community screenings campaign that was going on, we realized that conferences, including the Art House Convergence, are a great place to find your audience and really grow that audience by meeting them where they gather. So we noticed that there was a very passionate group of people at land trusts throughout the country that were very excited about booking the film. And so we found that there was a conference where all of these land trusts would get together on an annual basis to discuss land trust things. We had no idea what this conference was about. We knew that the land trusts would be there, and we took a chance because this was in Sacramento, so it was driving distance for me and another impact producer who was here in the Bay Area. We could get there. So we negotiated a deal with the conference where we would get a booth for free by showing the film for free at the conference to conference attendees. There were 45 total exhibitors. There was one film. We were mixed in with the Park Service and different startups like Hipmunk that, they basically are Airbnb for outdoor spaces, a lot of land trusts. There was the Department of Homeland Security. It was a riot. And we were the stars of the show because we had a poster, and here's me with Smokey the Bear at the conference. And through that, we were able to book a handful of screenings, but what happened that was really more significant than anything else was I met the director of partnerships for the Western region for the National Park Service, who came up and said, this is important. How do we get this film shown to all of our national parks staff and visitors? And that was quite a statement, and he meant it. And this was, the director of partnerships. He, really thought outside of the box from the beginning. He's been with the Park Service, I think, almost 50 years, and he started the Riveter Park here in Richmond. So this was, iconic figure in the National Park Service. So we had screenings with National Park employees at the NPS office here in San Francisco, and established a partnership with them to do a number of screenings. And then they also, in concert with some of our other local partners, helped to support screenings, spread the word, and really also, being able to call the Park Service one of the, partners for our campaign really did a lot to open up doors for other local groups to see that, wow, this is a value, and the people that are out there trying to protect land and lead hikes on nature, those were the people that were the most passionate about this film and were the champions for it. Yeah.
So did you screen the film at the conference?
We did, and the screening was really kind of, an afterthought. It was, something that they screened, and there were a handful of people that came in and applauded, but it wasn't something that the conference did regularly. And you'll find that some conferences are very used to screenings and they have a mechanism for it. They build it into the schedule. At conferences, it can be a double-edged sword. You've got a lot of people, sometimes in the tens of thousands attending the conference over the weekend or the week. You're also competing with a lot, and especially a film, you're competing with people who've been listening to workshops all day and are exhausted and just want to go out and get a beer. So you have to be very targeted in your approach to conferences and knowing what are we going to get out of it? How is this going to support the distribution goals that we have as a team? And weighing that, return on investment about what might be possible, and taking a risk when it's worth it. And so we did that in a targeted way. In some of these conferences we ruled out, and some of them we went to. Another example is the Association of Outdoor Education and Recreation. So this is the outdoor educators at most college campuses across the country coming to talk about outdoor ed. And again, we were the only film. This is the first time. It was a lot of work to set up the logistics of the screening. We ended up having to bring our own projector, but it was also a situation where we were the stars of the show. And they absolutely loved it, and they said, that's it. We now are making a film screening part of our conference for the rest of time, and we loved it, and please come back next year if you have another film. And one of the reasons that we decided to go to that conference specifically was that as an exhibitor, you actually had access to the contact information for every attendee and could send out emails and updates throughout the year for 12 months. So we had access in a way that was not reaching out cold to these outdoor recreation programs on college campuses, which have budgets, and we were able to book screenings and a speaking engagement. I think it actually turned out to be more than what the numbers reflect here, but also led to other screenings and a few partnerships. And so that was one of the other values of that conference. So I see hands popping up all over the place. Probably a good time to take some. Yeah.
Here you go.
Two money-related questions. What kind of fees were you charging for these particular screenings that you were booking? And then what did each of these campaigns actually cost? The one you talked about in this case study, now that you're talking about the cost for the whole campaign that you guys did for them.
So as far as the screening fees that we were booking, they were there was a tiered pricing structure that was between. Sometimes we would make exceptions to this, but on the low end, I believe it was $175 for a small community group, up to $750, and that was pretty typical of the range. Most of this screening fees that we charge were in the range of $250 to $400, and a little bit larger if they were conferences, and then speaking engagements, usually between $1,500 to $2,500 for a speaking fee or an honorarium for the filmmaker to attend. So I don't have the overall numbers for the budget for you for that, but we, as part of our resource materials, we actually share some of that where we have different types of films and budgets, but I don't have the overall breakdown of the cost for that. So we had a couple more hands go up. I'll just take two questions because I do want to keep rolling.
Here you go.
I noticed on the previous slide you had hashtag love my nature. Why would you not use the title?
Thank you for pointing that out. So this was an example of trying to get engagement on social media and coming up with a fun hashtag that people then could use to engage on the Facebook page. So people were given an easy way to grab the hashtag Love My Nature and please share with us a picture of you in nature, somewhere that you love in your backyard. So it was really fun, and we got pictures from all over the country of people, in the snow and at the beach and in between, and there was some engagement. But in terms of did this start a movement, that, you need more than a hashtag to start a movement. And we learned our lesson with that we were very excited and enthusiastic about, getting that going. And it was a lot of fun, and it did help, with some social media engagement. And so that's what that hashtag is from the social engagement campaign. Maybe, yeah, let's keep rolling here, and then we can, if you want to jot down your questions. So these are the partners that we brought on board in some capacity. And I think up here was the question about partners, right, from earlier. So let's touch on this. So partner, these partners, we engaged at all different levels. So, just rolling through Sierra Club and the Wilderness Society booked screenings. We had a couple of screenings on Earth Day, which is also close to John Muir's birthday. So we had the San Francisco or Bay Area chapter of Sierra Club and Berkeley chapter come, and it was really fun, to dress up in the John Muir outfit and come up after the screening and talk to people about some of their initiatives. So we did that with Tree People, Biomimicry Institute, Bioneers, Centers for Spiritual Living, Animos, Mom's Clean Air Force. So for National Park Service, I mentioned that. For Green Festival Expo, that was something where the filmmaker was a speaker at the conference, and we negotiated with them where they actually gave the film a free booth, which was great, and we waived the screening fee. And I would encourage everyone to consider when it makes sense to monetize your film, and when the greater value might not be money, and it might be the exposure that you're getting. So you never want to give away your film for free, but if it's sort of an in-kind gift that you're getting a tremendous amount of promotion with, I think it was 25,000 people through each weekend. They did 6 events in DC, LA, New York, Portland, and San Francisco. And Love Thy Nature was featured in the Los Angeles Green Expo with Sylvie as a speaker alongside like Ed Begley. And, so you can have fun with, negotiating these different partnership deals. There's a great workshop about before you tie the knot with different partners, and we've got a dynamo in the room here. It's a hard driver. That workshop is already on the Berkeley Film Foundation website, so I don't want to get too much into that because there's a whole workshop to talk about that. But really just being clear about what the value potentially from each of these partners is really important to keep in mind. And then something, that, if you're going to do a full impact and community screenings campaign, having a brain trust meeting with potential partners before you start that is a great idea, if not a necessity. So that instead of the conversation being, how can you help us? Or, what should I pitch to these partners? It's, look, can you please give us some feedback about this film and how it might be used as a tool? And then that really flips the conversation for the partners to offer some honest feedback, and naturally will come out with ways that they think that they can be helpful, or where it might align with certain initiatives that they have. And through the partnership with the NRDC, we learned pretty quickly that they did not have the bandwidth to really help with the theatrical campaign or promoting the community screenings, because they were actually rolling out their own film, Sonic C at the time. But they were able to offer some help with publicity and some email lists. So really, having a brain trust meeting, which I won't get too into, but another workshop here that Sonia Childress from Firelight did goes into a brain trust meeting and the value of that and how to set that up. But really trying to assess what the value of each partner is potentially, and then being ready to quickly pivot. Ask for your central and most pivotal ask, and then quickly have your B, C, and D asks lined up to say, okay, you can't do that, I understand, but would you, be able to, consider giving us a shout out on your, social media? So before I jump into the next short video, so Love Thy Nature had a DIY theatrical release, which meant that it was all impact producers and outreach interns. It was a team, I think at the time, maximum we had about 4 of us working on that for promotion of the theatrical campaign and booking the community screenings. And then we brought on a distribution partner, Tug. How many of you are not familiar with the platform Tug? Okay, so Tug is a platform that allows cinema on demand screenings. So once you get your film accepted by the team at Tug and you've gotten your film onto the platform itself, it offers you and your fans an opportunity to book screenings of the film without having to go through the process of hiring a booker to book theaters or to do what we did, which is connect with the exhibitors directly and book the films directly through the exhibitors, or having to four-wall your screening by basically renting a theater and then having your screenings. So what the platform allows is for you to choose and become your own promoter of screenings. But it also allows your fans to set up a screening themselves. So maybe someone from the Sierra Club or Moms Clean Air Force in Vermont want to set up a screening. They don't have their own facility, and they love to do it in a theater because it's Liam Neeson, and they'll do that through Tug. So on that note, let me play this next video. And this is another film. I know it's kind of a departure, but it really shows you how some filmmakers take control of the cinema on demand and community screenings and use their website as a way to let their fans and audience know how they can book the film themselves.
Hi, I'm Nadia, co-director and producer of Ocean Driven. Ocean Driven tracks the heroic and true story of big wave surfer and ocean pioneer Chris Burdish.
The film tracks his 10-year journey to train and paddle into some of the largest waves on the planet. For years, he overcame a range of challenges, including a near-death experience moments before achieving a legendary victory in some of the biggest waves ever seen at the Mavericks Invitational. It's an uplifting story about the power of the ocean, family, and extraordinary dedication to making your dreams come true. After nearly 4 years of filming Chris and his big wave family, we've watched his story empower people up close. The Ocean Driven team invites you to screen Ocean Driven in your community. It's really easy to host a screening and it doesn't cost anything. It only takes a few moments of your time because our film is now available on Tug. Tug is a revolutionary way to help independent films reach new audiences. You can bring Ocean Driven to your community with just a few keystrokes. Go to oceandriven.com and click on Host a Screening. If you want to host in a theater, select the license, place, date, and time. Then we'll help each other reach the threshold of sales to make it happen. If you're with a group or club organization, you can even raise money at the same time, and a portion of all screenings will go to our oceans. Help us bring Ocean Driven to your hometown and inspire more viewers to follow their dreams. Thanks so much from all of us at Ocean Driven.
So we worked with the Tug team as a way to be able to fulfill those requests that we got for theatrical screenings. If we had a one-night appearance in a city and somebody missed it and they heard about it through the outreach and they wanted to see the film, they could go ahead and book their own screening. And so, as Nadia explained, there's a threshold number of tickets that need to be purchased in advance. And she misspoke a little bit by saying that it's free. It's free in the sense that for the promoter who wants to bring the film to their town, to a theater near them, it does cost nothing. And in fact, the promoter gets a small reward, I think of 3 to 5%. They may have changed it for doing that work, to do the outreach and make sure that people come up and the event goes live and is green lighted. For community screenings, it's something where you can set up a tiered licensing system with the cost for the screenings being right there on the website. Or you could just use Tug for cinema on demand screenings and do your own community screenings, which is what we did with Love Thy Nature. So we retained those rights. So Love Thy Nature kept all of the rights to non-theatrical screenings, and the deal with Tug, gave them a cut of the ticket sales for the cinema on demand screenings, and then the cut of the art house screenings was only split with the exhibitors. So this is true hybrid distribution, making deal by deal and being counseled along the way by people that have done this before, so that you can make sure to sign on the dotted line when it makes sense and to structure the deal in a way that makes sense for your distribution goals. So I'll just say, to wrap up with Love Thy Nature, is I think that there might be opportunities to bring on distribution partners, but it's really a case study in there is definitely still hope. And if you have the will and you have the resources, or willing to put in the time to fundraise to get the resources, you can make sure that your film has a theatrical release, has a community screenings campaign. And when you make those decisions that are in line with your intention, your purpose for your distribution, it can be a really wonderful win where some filmmakers kind of pack it up and pack it in at that point and say, hey, festival run, didn't get distribution, not going to do it this time, maybe with the next one. So there still are opportunities through hybrid distribution to get the film out there and have it reach its audience and to generate revenue while doing that. So.
All right. Yeah, I think we're just going to go quickly on this. So we have about 10 minutes. We might go a few minutes over because we got started a little bit late. I'm just going to go real quickly through this one. This is a film by Roger Weisberg, who is a longtime, venerable filmmaker of basically all of his films have been shown on PBS. This is his most recent one, and I was involved in working on it. And I'm just going to use this as a quick demonstration of the kinds of resources that you can make available to accompany your film when it travels around in the world, especially through community screenings. So can we have the web? Oh no, I have to do that here. Let's see. Not sure if this is actually live. Yes, it is. Awesome. Great. Okay, so yes, so Dream On investigates the state of the American dream after decades of rising income inequality. John Fugelsang, the political comedian, was the star of the film essentially, and he went around tracing the path of Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America to see if the American dream is still alive. That is the synopsis. And so I just want to show you some of the resources that we put together for the film. And they live here on the PBS website. Most films, well, I shouldn't say most because I don't actually have numbers on this, but a very common feature is to have a viewer guide that helps your hosts structure their screenings. How many people have done a screening guide for their films already? Only a few. Okay. Great. So it could be of any length. Now, this was quite a monster. It was almost 70 pages long. So it was a lot of research that went into it, a lot of writing. went into it, but it's beautifully designed, and it essentially just tells you, it gives you all the background information about the film. It gives you ideas on how to host a screening, because a lot of people don't know how to do it. How do you acquire the film? How do you get a venue? What should you do to publicize it? It gives background information, in this case, many, many pages of background information about the American dream, the rise of inequality. And then it will have sort of like a study guide at the end, generally, which, it could either have just discussion questions or it could have actual study units. And so this film, as we scroll down here, after a lot of charts and graphs and whatnot, so this is an example. So it covered a lot of different topics, so it can go by topic. I've done other guides where I'll put in a live link, so the person can go over here and click on this image, and they'll get the clip from the film. And the film, the character in the film will be talking about that subject, foreclosure and homelessness. You'll have discussion questions, more information about this topic. And it really allowed community groups to be able to zero in on the areas that they were most interested in using. So if you're a housing group, you could watch the film, and then you can go to this piece of the guide, you can have background, have a discussion, have really great discussion questions. There's all sorts of things you can put in the guide, and it's really a lot of fun, and obviously it could be beautifully designed. So it's a great resource. Just real quick, there's a lot of other kinds of resources you can provide to your host who do these community screenings as a value add. A screening toolkit is a pretty common feature, and that can include a lot of different components. It could have a digital flyer that folks can, like we saw with Inequality for All, put their own flyers together. We do press release templates, so people, we'll actually research and write about the material. So it's a template that people can just plug in their own organization and date and time and send it to the press. Invitations to legislators to participate, sample social media posts, kind of just to do it yourself. And again, the sky's the limit to the type of things that you might want to put in the guide. To put into the screening toolkit to help people, have a really productive screening. So I think that's all I'm going to cover in here. In this case, PBS did come up with additional study units with resources that could be used in the classroom setting. So if you're familiar with, navigating on the PBS website, POV and whatnot, they generally have, study information that's broken down like this in a way that's really useful for educators. So, I just wanted to be able to show you some of these materials that are really, they make the screening much more like a cohesive experience and an experience that's useful for the hosts. All right. So I think we're going to have Matt come back up if I can get back to our other screen here. There it is. Okay.
Great. So the next film, case study, is, again, double mic action here. Food Evolution, which is a documentary that premiered in 2016. So a lot of this could be applied to films that don't do a screenings campaign, don't have an impact component, but still want to make the best decisions around its release sequence. So this was the release for Food Evolution with a festival release in 2016, released in theaters through a distributor, Abramarama. How many of you have heard of Abramarama? They are great. They're really fun to work with. So while some films, it may be a little contentious working with a distributor and doing community screenings, they were wonderful to work with, and we had a lot of fun doing community screenings before, during, and after the theatrical release, and it really, we worked well together as a team to roll out the film during that summer, and then really kind of wrap things up. It generated a lot of press through its release in the summer, and we were able to use that buzz that happened during the summer of 2017 to fold that into a really highly successful community screenings campaign. Again, an example of where a theatrical release was a loss leader. Through the hiring of the PR team, the distributor's fee, and the outreach team, the digital marketing team that was on board for those screenings. The 17K that came from theatrical screenings did not come close to covering that, but it allowed for some rave reviews in the New York Times and the LA Times, and close to, like 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, et cetera, that really raised the profile of the film and got the word of mouth buzz as well as press coverage going. So the film did decide to release on Hulu in September of 2017. There was some conversation around that. What is this going to do, as far as the community screenings campaign, releasing the film in theaters. So it was negotiated that it would not be released during the theatrical campaign, but shortly following that, it was released. We saw a slight dip in the conversion rate for community screenings as we were doing the outreach for that, but then it quickly recovered and really was just a blip. So it's an example of the subscription video on demand, Netflix, Hulu, et cetera, where it actually did not seem to cannibalize in any meaningful way opportunities for booking the film at conferences and schools and community groups. The transactional video on demand release was in January of 2018. Meanwhile, community screenings were continuing and are continuing to this day throughout all of this. And in April of 2018, Food Evolution brought on another distribution partner for its educational release, which was Grasshopper Film. I think in the next slide, I'll show you all the different team members for Food Evolution during and after the theatrical release. And the EVOD release, which will be on Canopy, there's a holdback for that so that the community screenings campaign can continue. Because one of the challenges when you release on EVOD is you may cannibalize some of the bookings that you would have on college campuses, because technically, according to the PDA model, if those schools have that license agreement, they are able to screen the film, and you may not reach that threshold of 4 PDA plays, which would mean essentially you did a screening without getting a screening fee. So in order to not cannibalize that and to help assist with the DVD sales that are going on through Grasshopper, there's a holdback for the EVOD release, and then there's still not a definite timeline for any release on AVOD or for the home use DVD itself, but it will be sometime in 2019. So the Food Evolution team, during the theatrical release, you can see it was quite robust with a PR team, a theatrical distributor, consultant, partnership strategist, community screenings team, digital marketing agency, and then the production office itself with the director, the producer, and 2 interns. During the screenings campaign and educational release, a lot of the same team overlapped with that, with Caitlin, Allie, myself, and Michelle, and our team. Smart House, Black Valley stayed on, and then additionally in 2018, Grasshopper was brought on, and just recently, the film to assist with outreach to K through 12 schools and conferences, and to produce an educational curriculum guide, Big Picture Educational, came on board shortly after Grasshopper, so that's not on the timeline yet. So with Food Evolution, really the trickiest part was figuring out that release strategy and how to time everything. And I think that this is not typical, but we were brought on to do community screenings. But ultimately, when one of the producers went on to do other things and take a different position, a desk job in New York, our team then kind of assumed the role of PMD, or producer of marketing and distribution. So we worked directly with the director to make those decisions around the different windows for the release, and we're able to really negotiate that successfully, and had a lot of fun working with the Brahmarama on the theatrical, and have had a great time also working with Grasshopper and Big Picture on the educational release. And this is, not typical, but with the great press coverage that came from the, Lost Leader theatrical release, we were able with this campaign so far to book over 500 screenings, and it's brought in a revenue that has definitely paid for the theatrical campaign and is in excess of $500,000 in revenue as of right now. So that obviously is an outlier and more the exception than the rule. But when you are able to capitalize on that type of press coverage and buzz and do thoughtful outreach and get enough partners on board, and you have the right tiered pricing structure for your semi-theatrical screenings at universities and conferences and groups, it can really be a significant revenue stream for films. So there's probably a lot more to talk about with food evolution, but I think we will wrap it there, and we have time for questions. Yeah. So why don't we jump right in? I had a couple of quick responses. Maybe we can do more of a fireside chat now. So one that stuck out to me was your question around creative fundraising strategies. So that is a difficult one. As far as fundraising strategies, they're all over the map. But I would like to point out something that happened with another film, States of Grace, that we worked on. And sometimes the best way to fundraise is to get your film out there. And I think this goes back to that graph about it being a distribution mechanism. So film festivals are a way to get your film out there, as are conferences and other screenings. But what's great about film festivals is that you don't need to put in, the time and money to book that venue yourself. There's already a built-in PR team for the festival, and so it's a great opportunity to get exposure for your film. And I won't go too much into the States of Grace release, but it was a really beautiful film about a physician, Grace DeMond, who's here in the Bay Area, who had a head-on collision and is going to spend her life in a wheelchair, and is just absolutely inspiring in the way that she faces that challenge. And so we were doing outreach to the medical community, and were able to book a few screenings at conferences, mainly the Women in Medicine Conference, which was a lesbian doctors conference in the Northwest, I believe, that year. And through that, we were able to book the film at the American Medical Women's Association conference the following year, and we had a real small screening. It was a big disappointment numbers-wise, with a room of 13 people. But one of the people that saw the film said, "This film, without a doubt, needs to be screened in every medical school in the country. I have a foundation. Could you use some money to do something like that?" You can imagine our reaction. We said, "No way, keep your money. We'll do it ourselves. We like it." And so that is a form of creative fundraising, in the sense that when you get your film out there and you connect with your film's passionate fans and core audience and are the champions for the film, that creates a community of people that want to support the work that you're doing. So more than anything, getting your film out there, getting it seen, and creating those strategic partnerships where you can get the film screened in a place where it has a home that makes sense can lead to those opportunities. We've got quite a few here. So, I think we touched on your question about the splits, and if I didn't make that clear in walking through the case study, it's really important to gather information, and deals are sort of all over the place. But it starts with knowing, which rights that you have and which rights you want to retain with each of these contracts. Really look carefully, and if you don't, if you're not familiar with that, hire somebody that can guide you through that process, or seek out a colleague that's been through that, because that really is the piece where, in my experience, negotiating, a lot of times the distributor or distribution partner is very willing to, although it might be an all rights deal that they're pitching you, if they're not going to exploit those rights like community screenings, they can easily cut that out of the contract and not have it be something that interferes with taking your film on. So that's number one. And then number two is making sure that the numbers are fair, and gathering information on that. So it seems to be all over the place for SVOD deals. I've heard anything from the bottom end, 15,000 to 25K seems to be pretty typical. 50 or 75K is possible, and then sometimes if you hit it out of the park, it can be quite significant if it's the film on a topic, or you want to consider making your film a Netflix original. Those deals can be sometimes in the millions, but that's definitely the exception. As far as the theatrical splits, often that's pretty typical. 40% to the content owner, 60% to the exhibitor if you're doing it directly, and then distributors have their own terms, and some of them have a fee and then a split situation. So just really assessing, not only is this split equitable, but also, do I care? Or is this a loss leader that I just want to get the film out there and they're going to help me to do that? And then, educational distributors, it's quite significant, the cut usually that they're taking. So I think with that, you're not going to have a lot of room for negotiation, but it's more in terms of thinking strategically around the release sequence and when it makes sense to release the film via educational DVD. Do you want to do that yourself? How much is that going to cost? Are you seeing a lot of requests coming in to screen your film and to buy the DVD? And that will help you to assess whether a distributor really could be a great idea and be very helpful to utilize their contacts and lists, or whether it might make sense really to retain those rights and do it yourself, knowing that you're going to have to hire a team to do that, and you be compensated for your own time.
So we've got a little bit of a change of plan here, since we have so many great questions, and really we're at 3:10 and want to let people move on. We're going to be able to answer these in some form.
Yes, I'm going to have them answer these questions on paper, and I will put them up on our workshop tab when we have the video and the transcript. These questions will be answered as well. But I want you to all have an opportunity to come down and meet Matt and Michelle personally, and I want to get a couple pictures. And you have your business card here, and you're offering something interesting. Do you want to say briefly what that is before they come down and bombard you?
Sure. So first of all, for everybody that wants, we're going to put together a Google folder with some resources and sample budgets and funding sources that we'll put together for everybody. So all you have to do is go on our website or take a card and email us. And then if you end up having a ton more questions that can't be answered here and really need some help with some strategy and consulting, if you are interested in an hour of consultation, we'll add on an extra hour and make that into 2 hours for anybody that wants a consultation. But as far as for today, we're perfectly happy to here to hang out. We've got no agenda after this, and talk to everybody. And thank you all so much for coming and contributing. I just would like to say before we wrap up, I would like, and we would like to challenge everybody to use that worksheet or some version of it and challenge yourself to put down some goals in that column and then go back to your intention and your vision about what success looks like and really then take another look at those goals and see, does this really align with what I want to do? And I think it will be helpful for everybody. So thank you.
And for the BFF, if you're not following us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, you should, because a lot more information will come out there and also on our website. And really, thank you all for coming very, very much. Thank you.